Welcome back to Expert Instruction, the Teach by Design podcast where we dive deeper into the research surrounding student behavior by talking with the people implementing these practices, where they work, and with the students they support. I'm Megan Cave.
And I'm Nadia Sampson.
Guys, it's a Monday. We're recording today on a Monday morning, and I've got real Monday vibes happening. Everything is so cold in this office. There's a draft. You know what I need is I just wish that everything was so much cozier. I wish that I wish I had a fireplace and maybe some cookies in the oven, and I feel like a cat curled up on my lap. And basically, Nat, I just need to come to your house. I think what I'm saying is I would like to be at your house right now.
Girl, I got you. I got
good.
you. I am happy to throw some cookies, some banana bread, throw a cat on your lap, whatever you need, girlfriend.
I'll take it. I'll take it all. I'll take it all. Well, okay. Well, we're here. We made it. And here we are. Today, we've got part 2 of our discussion with Sean and Maria. We started out in the first part last time, talking with them about vulnerable decision points, or VDPs. We learned what they are. We learned about some of the common VDPs that schools experience. We talked a little bit about the benefits of checking for VDPs in your equity work, and we talked about how to start the sometimes challenging conversations and the self-reflection that's necessary before we start jumping into solutions, like what can we do to solve this problem. And after that conversation, I know that I personally found myself in the middle of lots of situations where I was like, I think this is a VDP. And I mean, honestly, it felt kind of nerdy to think about that to myself. I was like, who calls them that? But it's true. I noticed it. I noticed it more after our conversation. It was so helpful too, because just the awareness of being in that moment, it brought me out of my unconscious reaction where I was just flailing around like a crazy adult. And it brought me to a more thoughtful and deliberate place. I need to stop what I'm doing right now and be more thoughtful about what I'm doing. What about you, Nad? Did you notice anything?
Yeah, I really did. I do a lot of trainings.
Yes.
And I notice when I'm in trainings, as I was last week,
yes.
where if I'm feeling rushed, or if I don't think I quite know the answer, or I've got my agenda, or I've got the standard answer, or hey, that's on our website. When people are asking questions in those trainings, I can find myself really not paying attention. I'm just trying to get to the next thing. And that's not always fair. And it really
at
does.
The beginning of your training, you feel like you've got some stronger questions or the ability to answer those questions in a more thoughtful way. And by the end, you're just
I'm just time's up.
Oh, geez. I gotta go
run.
Check the website. I'm sure there's some answers there.
Exactly. Let me get back to that. And I don't get back to it or something like that.
No. And so some people get their questions answered thoughtfully.
And some don't.
Some people just don't get an answer at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So with all that in mind, we're back today with Sean and Maria to talk about one solution, and it's called a neutralizing routine. And we shared a little bit about it in our Teach by Design article this month. But here today, Sean and Maria are going to fill us in on how they've worked with school teams to implement a school-wide routine based on the school-wide VDP, vulnerable decision point, identified in their data.
Yeah. And then at the end of the episode, the 4 of us found ourselves asking a much bigger question, which was, how does all of this work address the larger systemic inequalities in education? And that we wondered if by calling these VDPs or our implicit bias or our unconscious bias, are we actually skirting the real problems that we're trying to solve, right? And spoiler alert. We didn't actually land on one answer or another. It was a good conversation, but Sean and Maria brought us right back to the real purpose in this work around VDPs and neutralizing routines, which is that we have to just find a place to start. Okay, team. So we're back at this. We're going to keep going in our conversation. So once we've done all of these bits, right? We've looked at our data. We've identified some points during the day that are more vulnerable to our unconscious implicit bias than others. And we've had some conversations with each other as adults about what's going on for us in those times, and doing a bit of self-reflection on the role that we play that contributes to the outcomes that we see with students. So at this point, like, I think we're in a place where it's sort of a now what situation. Are we ready then as a group? Like, once we've done all of that, are we in a place to start talking about solutions? Is that where we go?
Oh yeah.
Definitely. Oh yeah. I love that.
Definitely. We do not want to leave them hanging with like, oh yeah, here's all that.
Yeah. Good luck
we do.
you.
And
good luck to you. And
figure it out.
Yeah. Hopefully you get something figured out. So what are one of the solutions that we brought up last time we talked was a neutralizing routine as a way to interrupt the vulnerable decision point. So can you guys help us with what is that? What is a neutralizing routine?
So it's exactly that, as you mentioned. I think it's a self-management strategy, essentially, that you're using at this moment in this routine where you identify you're more vulnerable to reacting, and your implicit bias kind of like determining like your act for you, right? And when you're thinking of a neutralizing routine, you're thinking of something that's brief, that gives you or puts in place enough time for your brain to go from an automatic reaction into this space of making more conscious reactions instead. And that's like about 28-30 seconds, so it's something that's brief, has clear steps to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then essentially you're just interrupting like that your go-to reaction.
Got you. So let's use an example as we talk through this. So Sean, from your work, you had identified that, was it defiance or disruption all day long is a problem?
Defiance
in the classroom anytime during the day. So let's pick a time. Let's say at the end of the class, let's say. So we know that like at the end of class, we've got some behaviors that I would identify, let's say, as defiance. So my kids are packing up their stuff, let's say, before the bell has rung. They see that there's 3 minutes left of class and they're starting to shuffle their stuff around, right? And I know that that's a problem for me because I'm still talking. And so what you're saying, Maria, is that I need to plan out something that I'm going to do to keep me from losing it in that moment, and having like an automatic reaction to the paper shuffle that is more calm or instructive, or what is my goal there?
It can be definitely both, or just starting with just calming, like just taking care of yourself in that moment, taking some deep breaths.
So whatever it is that I choose to do, it has to be short. I heard you say it has to be something that's quick. It has to be something that has some steps to it, but just a few, probably, if it's quick. So just like a couple of steps that I can remember. And it has to interrupt whatever my automatic reaction would be, which would maybe to like yell or say, hey, instead of doing that, I need to do something different. I think that was it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Can anything be considered a neutralizing routine? Nat had a funny example the other day when we were talking about this. What did you say you would do? Like sometimes what you do in those moments, Nat?
Oh gosh.
I think it was like, what if I just walk away?
Oh yeah.
I was like, yeah, that might work, but maybe you have to come back also. Like,
right. If just walking away, ignore, or just walking away and going, I'm not going to engage in this discussion. Is that a neutralizing routine?
Is that a neutralizing routine, or are there things that maybe we do that, like, is there a non-example? Let's say.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. You're, not just to your example, and that, walking away for that moment, it's still something that you're doing to yourself, like you're not doing anything. It's not something that's done to us, or you're not doing anything to someone else. You're taking an action that's for you. So walking away, even if it's like maybe around the classroom, or just, paying attention to someone else as you're continuing speaking or something, like that's still part of a neutralizing routine. You're still keeping the student in the classroom instead of excluding them while doing that, right? And maybe, let's say, as they're I know I'm mixing examples here, but like a student is about, cleaning up already, and your natural reaction would be to, like, I don't know, just call them out or single them out for that action in front of everyone. And, that might engage in, you're not doing that, your students still within the class, still listening to the conversation or whatever it's going on. And it's still brief,
Yeah.
You're giving yourself some moment to maybe, calm yourself down, and then ask them to, like, hey, can we talk, after we're wrap up here instead, like, and then you might not be addressing it in that moment, but you're also indicating that you will be addressing and having a conversation with them, probably in a more private way, in a more respectful way, instead of in front of everyone, which students hate to be put in that type of spot.
By the way,
you're right. Not just student, anyone probably. Yeah. So yeah.
So that could be the routine. And so basically it's not the full scope of things. This is just what we're doing to get ourselves collected and make a specific decision instead of a reactionary one, that we are being deliberate in our actions. So this is not problem solving a behavior. It's actually just getting us to a place where we know that the decision we're making is like the actual choice, and not just our reaction to the context.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples that a teacher shared once in a training was a high school teacher, for instance. How we, in high school, students already look like they're more adults than not, but they're still children, right? So I love this teacher's example because she used visuals. She asked her students to give her a picture of them when they were like little, like in elementary school or something. And she had them like near like her desk area and stuff. And when they would, do something that would get on her nerves, like she would stop to look at their picture and remind herself, like, this is still a child. This is still a student who needs, instruction and practice. And I need to remember that. And just give herself some instance to kind of like remind herself of like who's in front of her. And empathize, or, reframe, like move from, oh my God, you should know this already, come on, to, go about instruction from like, what should you do instead? Or I don't know, something along those lines that would instead engage the student in, and practicing a skill that they're not showing in that moment. But for her to be able to do that, she kind of like knew she needed to prompt herself and remind herself, like, these are still little kids, little people that are learning, and I'm here to teach them.
So Maria, I've heard you talk though about a couple of different strategies, and I remember I read an article of yours about neutralizing routines, and there are 3 different types. Is that right? That you guys have kind of focused in on, that are strategies that work. What are those 3 different types of routines?
Yeah. So one of them is delaying your response, giving yourself like some time, a couple of seconds until you can like think a little bit clearly.
Something to delay the response.
Yeah, you're delaying.
Okay.
Moving that from that automatic to a different conscious decision. You can reframe the situation So sometimes, like the picture of the students, she's reframing, these are students, these are kids I'm still teaching. You can think of them, sometimes it's a matter like, I care a lot about you, yet what you're doing is not right. So let's talk about it, and you're combining there, right? Reframing, you're still putting in front of whatever you're going to say, how much you're trying to be, you're being empathetic, you're communicating that you care about them, yet you're going to address the situation, even if it's a little bit later, right?
Yeah.
So you can reframe the situation. Some people use examples as like, react as if the student is in physical pain and you're taking care of it in that moment. It kind of puts you in a different mindset.
Or like asking, like, are you okay? Is everything okay?
Right. Or like, oh my God,
you
what's
need
wrong?
Something? How can I help? Yeah,
exactly. And then just take care of yourselves, and we talk of this example. You're in an airplane, an emergency is occurring, you first have to put your mask, right, before you can take care of like the kid that's next to you or someone else, right? So taking deep breath, recognizing that you're upset, and taking a deep breath to let those go, or modeling the reset strategy that you chose or your faculty chose together as the school-wide neutralizing routine. So those are three general ways that we think about it.
So Nat, I think your strategy of walking away is a delay tactic. So I think you're postponing your actual reaction by like leaving.
Right. So I just want to clear. So delay, reframe. What did I miss?
Self-management, I think.
Take care of yourself. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that whole idea too of, and I think this is part of the struggle we sometimes have is behaviors communication and trying to figure out what is this kiddo trying to let me know, and trying, even just saying what you said is like, are you okay? What's going on? I'm noticing that, or that, even just saying it to yourself, even if you don't say it out loud to the kid, of just having that conversation with yourself is like, what is going on right now for this kiddo? I'm going to take a minute and try to see if I can tap into that, so that I can better meet their needs. So
I think what's so nice too about having these options is that you can find something that feels like a natural way for you to handle that moment for you personally, So for me, I would find myself, I think, reframing often, or just trying to like take a breath and take care of myself, or just notice that I'm escalating in the situation. But other people might just need to like say out loud, like, I can't handle this right now. I can't talk to you about this right now, but I'd like to talk to you about it later, would be a different strategy that would work for other people. So it's nice to know that there are lots of different ways. And Maria, you just mentioned coming up with a school-wide routine.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Are you talking about like you've got one routine that everybody does?
Basically, we've seen this work in different ways, but definitely we encourage, we usually have folks working grade level teams, or kind of like, depending on middle school or high school, might be departments, and think about what might be a neutralizing routine that works for them as their group. And sometimes everyone put every group put theirs out there, and we talk and try to come to a consensus and pick a neutralizing routine for the whole school.
Interesting.
And if someone is very attached to a particular one, then we encourage them to, like, that might be your personal one that you're using maybe more automatically, but as a school, right, as a student transition between places, we want to maintain a consistent language.
Yeah. How do you know when it's working?
usually the outcome is not worse. It usually make things more amicable
Yeah.
for folks.
So how do you know that that's going on? Is that a data thing? Are you looking at numbers? Are you taking stories from people? How do you know that it's working? You've done it. You've got people working on their routines and making different choices. And then how do you know that you've actually had an impact?
You can use your data, your school-wide data, right? We encourage teams to go back after a couple of months to see where those risk ratios or risk indices, whatever metrics they're using, like how are those looking, and see if it's still that same time behavior, like all the characteristics that, and it might not be the same one, it might be another one popping up. You can also think about it in terms of self-reflection and in terms of the teacher. How is that routine feeling for you after you've been trying this for a while? We definitely have conversations with teachers about it. And also I think about it like when we're teaching this to students, just breaking it down, like how do you know it's, you're not making, your actions are not making things worse for you or for those around you. Usually you can continue to be in that space or interacting with that person in a different way. There's the typical response wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
I'll just chime in here and say that, like, I think there's a tangible kind of emotional difference to how you feel about interactions after that point too, right? Like if you interrupt your normal flow that you think has maybe not been very positive, specifically with an individual student, I think about this at home too. If I'm able to interrupt what I know is going to be like a terse corrective kind of interaction and think to reframe it, like pause, you take your breath, you reframe it as they're learning. How can I make this instructional as opposed to like kind of just putting them down or trying to dissuade them from doing something that is defiant or whatever. If I can make that decision one that is instructive, gives the student maybe an alternative, gives the student another out, gives me an out to delay and then make that a positive interaction later, a building interaction as opposed to one that's tearing down. I think that's tangible for people. So that's not, I'm very data minded, but that's not, you're not tracking that. It's just kind of your sense of how your interaction.
But you know it when it's happening, right? Like, that how things feel when you walk into a classroom, when you're in the moment or whatever, you just know that something's different. It feels better. And it's hard to describe that with numbers. Sometimes you just know that it's working.
I think a question that was just occurring to me as we were, and if this is off topic, we can come back to it. But what about when a student is highly escalated and we're at a point where a student is unsafe? Are there different strategies that you would use? I mean, we've talked about de-escalation on another podcast, but I'm just wondering, do neutralizing routines come into play when you have a student that is being unsafe, or does it kind of go into, I don't know,
different?
I won't try and answer my own question.
I do think that's a great question. You do gotta, I think of, teachers, doctors, just people that are responding to situations that are like highly stressful. I do see a benefit to taking similar strategies as you are regulating yourself to be able to help this student or keep them safe, or like how you're keeping yourself centered or grounded in that moment so that you might have to take care of your other students, depending on like what is going on. And I certainly see overlap with when you're managing a crisis. Because I do think we use similar strategies to deal and handle yourself in those moments, what we, cognitively, I don't know that it would be the same. And in the sense that for the purpose of a neutralizing routine, we're really talking about, the implicit bias and that quick association that we know just takes seconds, and you're giving yourself about 28 seconds to go from the automatic brain to one that has a little bit of more time to consciously change the behavior. And in managing crisis, I do see the application of similar strategies, but that event, it's longer, right? And you're required, you might have to be following this, you're regulating yourself to follow a plan that might already be in place for such situations. So I do see the similarities, but I want to highlight a difference in terms of for what they're used.
It feels like we're in a Venn diagram situation where we've got like the strategies are the same, but the context is different. And so while we might need to take a beat for ourselves in both situations, one is to like really reassess our own internal state and get ourselves to making, like you were saying, conscious decisions, and the other is to keep ourselves regulated so that we are better able to help a student and support a student in the middle of a crisis.
Right. And then both are used so that you're supporting the student either way, because our actions are still having an effect on the student, whether it's implicit bias or not, right? Even if it's implicit bias, like the consequences of our actions cumulatively like have a big impact on those students' outcome. Just like in a crisis situation, the way that we handle a crisis situation have an impact on how long it takes to de-escalate a student, the amount of people involved, the intensity, how we take care of ourselves as well. Both of them do have definitely an impact on the students. I guess, we don't want to lose from perspective that for the neutralizing routine, we're really doing this to stop our biases from having that effect.
Nad and I, as we were talking about all of this, we've so appreciated having the two of you on to talk through vulnerable decision points and implicit bias and the ways that we can disrupt it during the day. And something that has come up for us throughout these conversations now and before that we haven't actually vocalized is something that we wanted to check in with you guys about, which is that we've got these new terms, right? Implicit bias, unconscious bias, vulnerable decision point. It all sounds pretty easy to talk about. And we wondered if by renaming some of these things or giving them names that feel better, that are we actually just making these conversations more palatable for people rather than really addressing what's actually going on and the harmful effects that these kinds of decisions can have on students and the outcomes that we would hope to see in our schools. And so we wondered if we could just maybe take some time just to reflect personally on that. And like, is that what we're doing, or are we doing something else? I don't know. What does this work mean to you, and why should we call it this? Are we making things more palatable?
I mean, yeah, I'll acknowledge upfront that this is a difficult aspect of the work, because what we're talking about is trying, through the research that we're doing, through the trainings that we're doing, we're trying to create actionable steps to support educators in reducing the effects of, I guess, what ultimately is systemic racism that's been built into our society. Like we're all exposed to these influences that generate stereotypes that are often unwarranted, almost always unwarranted in those cases. And it becomes entrenched. And so we're trying to recognize where those entrenched stereotypes might be influencing our decisions. And so, yeah, like ultimately some of the language that we use might not be as strong as some might advocate for.
Right.
But ultimately what we're getting at here is a theory of change, right? This is the way that we see an opportunity to improve equity in our decisions. And so we find these vulnerable decision points. It gives us a specific point. It's like, oh, well, I can't tackle the whole of racism in our school, but there's this moment where I think I have an opportunity to make a change that is going to reduce that possible impact. So yes, it's, I don't think this conversation does justice to the entire conversation of how systemic racism affects our students.
Right.
But it does give us a way forward to improve that situation.
Yeah. I agree with what you're saying, Sean. I also think about the work that we do, and we're doing most of this work through like teams, right? As we're coaching teams. And I do think of identifying VDPs and teaching and using neutralizing routines as just one strategy or entry point to working on equity within PDIS.
Yeah.
And just as there is a strategy, there are different ways that we can influence improving our systems, right? To make them more equitable. And I know that's something that as a center, we work on putting equity now at the same time, thinking and reflecting on what is it to put equity when we're thinking of building systems. So what are the types of trainings or the types of conversations that we want to help our professional learning communities to be having or be reflecting on? And of course, these are conversations that are happening with the team and they know their context better. And we know that contexts vary. There are states where you can't even use the word equity right now. So of course, doing this type of work in a place like that, it's going to be very different. Maybe starting with using language like vulnerable decision point might be more of an entry in some of those places, because like you mentioned, it might at a surface level, right? You might not be noticing or it might not be picking a lot of attention in that regard. But that's definitely not the only thing that we do. We work with teams. I'm thinking about their policies, and we know that explicit bias, unlike implicit bias, there's certain strategies that are more effective to reduce that. And some of that is top-down policies where we need our leaders to very explicitly promote equitable equity in the language of how our systems works, right? Vulnerable decision points is just one way within the data. We think of our circles, right?
Yeah.
Vulnerable decision point falls kind of like as a strategy within that circle of data. But there are different entry points as a framework, and some may or may not be more explicit than others. And the extent to which we talk about it or bring it forward into our schools definitely is going to vary by context and intentionality of where people are at, right? I think, and I'm just speaking for myself and where I'm at professionally at this moment. This might change in a year, in 5, in 20.
Sure.
But I would not want to not work with a school that might not be ready or might not want to talk about, not that they are not want to talk about equity, but like having everyone on board, like that would be a huge limitation, right?
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to stop working with a school just because everyone would not be on board, right? But I know there are strategies that when we do them in certain ways lead to equitable outcomes.
Yes.
And I would still want to encourage that work within that system, so that we can move in that direction, because students are still getting harmed.
Yeah.
Whether we are talking about it or not, that's happening. So kind of voicing again what Sean said, like looking for what are actionable ways that we could create some changes. And it's hard, honestly, it's very hard, and it's a very political
Yeah.
time, and that's okay, like that's needed. But how do we balance that? I don't know that I have a perfect answer for it, but I certainly don't want people to think about VDPs and neutralizing routine and not knowing that whether it's explicit or implicit bias, knowing it's implicit bias, we still know that excluding students drop the chances of them finishing school, increases their chances of interacting with the justice system at a young age and later on. We know it has a lot of different implications, and we do communicate that throughout our trainings. So just because we're talking about it as implicit bias or just that piece for this particular strategy, doesn't mean that we are not holding spaces within that same system to encourage reviewing policies, having teachers continue to have conversations about historical context, reflect on their own identities, how that may be similar or not with other students. This is ongoing work. This is ongoing work. And even if you do it one time, you gotta, it gotta keep going and gotta keep evolving with as a community. So the entry points might be different.
It reminds me a little bit of times when I've been working with or about to work with schools around positive behavior support, implementing PBIS, and been told, don't use the word PBIS. And so it was just thinking about how in this entire conversation, it wasn't until Sean just said systemic racism that we said that word, right? Someone said that out loud. And I remember times when I'd be talking to teachers and I'd say, well, this is what PBIS is, and this is maybe how you can do some of these things in your classroom. Like, well, I don't need that, things are that. And I said, and a lot of times when teachers would say that was the classroom where you walk in and like, you already are doing it. Like you are already doing this. And it just makes me think of if the entry point is talking about VDPs and neutralizing routines, that at some point you'd be able to look at a team or a school and say, we've been addressing systemic racism from the day we started. You can actually come back to it and begin using those words because your entry point was here, and now you're identifying, do you know what we're really doing? We're actually working on systemic racism. We're changing our system. So I just kind of like the idea of it as an entry point, but you're still coming back to how can we be more equitable? And you might be able to use those bigger words or those forbidden words at a later point. So,
and sometimes a team is up for that work, and as sometimes like people are in teams because they have more motivation or more wanting to create these changes, right? They might I don't know, I'm just thinking of how sometimes that's how it works, sometimes not. but there is a layer of conversations. It's like we know our faculty and they're not there yet. And they're the expert in their context, right? So we do think strategically about those things for sure. But you're right. There has, there gotta be that coming back to it. Because not mentioning a word becomes invisible.
Yeah.
If we don't talk about equity, if we don't talk about systemic racism, we could be doing good things, but they may or may not go unnoticed. And that's when we start also seeing a lot of, what is this? Just when things just transform into something that they're not,
Yeah.
And that can happen even when calling it, we're putting equity at the center, and yet what they're doing is not equity centered work.
It morphs into something different.
Right. Morph was the word that thank you. So it is important. I do think it's super important to be able to say some of these things and work with a team on these things explicitly.
Yes.
Yet we're also part of a larger system, and sometimes, like I said, doing work in different states right now.
Yeah.
How do you do equity work in those states when you're not even allowed to talk about it? So definitely the strategies become different in those spaces, just to move stuff forward that are going to have some level of impact, right? Or create better systems for our students, right? Even though we're not allowed, right? We can lose our jobs. We can, I don't know. It's felony for having certain books in our classrooms,
It's a really, all of this is so helpful to hear you guys talk about it, because it takes us back to when we first started this conversation about why are we even looking at VDPs? And it's because if we tried to tackle the entirety of the situation, we would be overwhelmed and have nowhere to start. So frankly, it gives us that entry point, like you've been talking about. It gives us a place to start from, and based on the work that you all and others have done, we actually have actions that we can take, steps that we can take that move us from identifying this moment in our school that's affecting outcomes to real action and strategies that we can implement quickly to try and affect a change. And then from there, it's like you said, it's not the strategy. This is one thing that we can do, and that hopefully you continue the work of centering equity in everything, and you just build upon it, right? That this is one place to start, and that you continue to take it further. Well, I know that I'm thankful for this conversation today, for everything that you guys have shared with us about these moments in the school day and how we can play a role in affecting change for so many people, but particularly for ourselves and for students. So thanks for having these conversations with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us and giving us a chance to spread the word on this work. This is important. I think it gives opportunities for teachers to run and try things right away. And so I think Maria's paper is a great reference for those.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.